This is Jeremy Park, CEO of CityCurrent, personally inviting you to Growth Current. Growth Current is our e-learning and online personal development platform with CityCurrent. It's an opportunity to attend virtual events with global thought leaders, national guest speakers, and experts who can help you grow personally and professionally. It gives you access to success secrets, lessons learned, learning modules, and so much more. Subscriptions are only $8 a month, and you can do bulk subscriptions for your team. Check out growthcurrent.co to learn more.
Welcome to the Changemakers Podcast, produced by CityCurrent and brought to you by Lipscomb and Pitts Insurance. This show shares personal stories and insight from those who are giving back and making a difference so we can learn and do the same. We cover life lessons, business advice, passion, and purpose. Now here's our host, the CEO of CityCurrent, Jeremy Park.
Welcome to the Changemakers Podcast, produced by CityCurrent. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're in for a treat with this one. We get to talk a lot about the world of HR and trends and even peanut buttering. And so we'll dive into what that means a little bit later on. But we're joined by Jen Alessandra. She's a Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer with Frontdoor. Jen, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Jeremy. It's great to be with you.
So the fun of this is we get to know you personally and professionally. So let's dive into you personally. Give us a little bit of just where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood.
Sure thing. I grew up in the Northeast in New Jersey, and both of my parents immigrated from Italy, and I'm a first-generation American. I grew up around a ton of family. I have 27 first cousins, and we were all in a very close physical proximity when I was growing up. And I also got interested in sports from a young age. So I was a competitive gymnast and then switched over to springboard and platform diving, which is not super typical in the Northeast. And that's part of my story and how I got to the West Coast to go to college.
Give me one family tradition. Obviously, with that many cousins and family around, family is a big part of it. But give me one family tradition that's a fun memory for you.
Oh, most of it revolves around food. So I don't know if I can figure out one that doesn't revolve around food. But one of my favorite traditions is during the holidays, there's a feast of 7 fishes, which is very typical for a lot of Italian and coastal Italian families, which happens on Christmas Eve, where you make 7 different dishes that have 7 different fish. And it is, can't walk out of one of those without being completely overstuffed. But one of my favorite memories is of making those different dishes with my family, and packing as many people into the kitchen as possible to do it.
Did it dawn on you, or have you really thought about in terms of kind of the first generation American, in terms of what your parents had to deal with to come over to America, what that transition was like for them? Was that a role or a factor at all?
Sure. My dad in particular came over when he was a teenager and had to teach himself English. So he was dropped into regular classrooms in high school and learned mostly through Sesame Street and other PBS broadcasts at the time, learned to teach himself English. And it had a huge influence on just the striving to achieve, and making our way and making our family proud of what we were accomplishing. So it absolutely had an influence on me.
So where did you mentioned the gymnast and then all of a sudden switching over to springboard? How did you get interested in that?
So, right around 12, 13 is when girls' bodies in particular change. And all of a sudden I was tall, which, is a joke because I'm 5 feet on a good day. So I was thinking about hanging it up on the gymnastics front. And when I did, I was sad because it was such a huge part of my life. And my mom heard about several gymnasts that had become divers. And she said, well, why don't you just check it out? And there was a pool fairly close to where I lived at the time. And so I went and did, and it was a great transition. It was a great suggestion that she had a ton of fun.
So what's it like in terms of the tumbling side? I've never interviewed a diver. So is it one of those where it becomes easy in terms of the transition and you enjoy all the rotations and things like that? Or is it a little scary at first? Or like, what's that like as a diver?
I loved that part of it. There were two big transitions. The first is in gymnastics, you are trying to land on your feet 100% of the time. And in diving, you are almost always trying to land on your head. And that took some time to get used to. The second is gymnastics does not have so much of a fear of heights involved. So, you're always close-ish to the ground, 10, 15 feet, whereas diving, there's a 10-meter platform, which is about 35 feet in the air. So that took a bit of an adjustment to get comfortable-ish.
So carry that forward then to how you end up on the West Coast at USC.
Yeah. So when I was preparing to go to college, there were two conferences that were the place to be for swimming and diving at the time, the SEC, of course, and the Pac-10 at the time. And so I went on several visits and, wound up at USC, and it was a great experience.
So what made you decide to get into the world of HR? Well, let's start with what were your degrees? Because you got your undergrad and your master's from USC, correct?
I did.
So
my undergrad is in psychology, and I was preparing to be a social worker. And when I was interning, I was in Southeast LA, right around the area that USC is. And I was working with an organization trying to get children out of gangs, or to not join gangs in the first place. And the work was so heavy. I mean, that the people who do that for a living are amazing, amazing humans. And I didn't know if I could do it full time for the rest of my life. And I'm still involved in organizations that try to get kids from joining gangs and keep kids out of gangs. But at that time, I thought, I don't know if I can do this as a profession. And so I decided I was going to work for a little while, and which was really ironic because my dad, his professional career, he was a CFO. And I had always said with great conviction, I'm never going to work in corporate America, So I remember calling him to tell him I got my job at Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm. And, he very graciously prevented himself from saying, I told you so. But I started working there. And first I was working in the risk consulting group, business process risk consulting group, which they were taking liberal arts majors at the time. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the world of business and solving problems that involved people and. So it was a people problem, and it was either a structural problem, a process problem, and really grew to enjoy that work. And it was when I was not that busy that I was doing some internal work for the firm, really on the HR and operations side, and got really energized by that. And so I decided to make a career choice, and the rest is history.
Well, when you deal with people, it's a lot of psychology. So when you look at actually, kind of the way that was paved, all of that kind of comes full circle to obviously what you're doing now, because a lot of it is the psychological. How do I, motivate, inspire people, but ultimately deal with challenges and opportunities with people? And then to your point, infuse that with technology and innovation and, all these other things that are the process and the business side. And you get this marriage of both worlds. So describe, let's kind of go ahead and dive into, actually, let's take this in pieces, because you had a career trajectory before getting to Frontdoor. So give us a little bit of that, because you had a chance to work with SolarWinds, Raytheon. So there's been a few companies. Give us a little bit of that trajectory and then leading to Frontdoor.
Sure. You nailed it with personal behavior and psychology being involved in change. And that is why I do what I do and why I love doing what I do. People very often know the changes that they need to make, whether it's a personal problem that they're trying to solve or in business. It's the human behavior part that is much more difficult to shape or to even make a personal change oneself. And so that's what really gets me energized. When I was at Raytheon, the last job that I had there was transforming a talent acquisition and total rewards part of the company. And the business was transforming at that time. The landscape had changed, and we were trying to figure out how to change the company along with it, and change that part of the work that we were doing. And that was my first big change leadership role for transforming my organization. For earlier in my career, I was the business partner to the operations leader or the sales leader trying to work on a business transformation. But that was the first time I personally owned it. And I found it extremely rewarding. And to do that both as a partner, as a HR partner to someone, and to do it within my part of the organization, I thought, okay, I'm going to seek out more opportunities like that. And that is how I got connected to SolarWinds. SolarWinds had just become public when I arrived. It was growing very rapidly. It was about 100 million in revenue when I started. It was $1 billion in revenue by the time I left. And we accomplished that by acquiring over 30 companies during those 7 years that I was there, and also growing the company organically, broadening into several international markets that we had not previously been in. And that dynamic changed. There was always something new. Yes, I had one job for the entire time I was there. I was their chief people officer, but I really felt like I had 5 or 6 jobs because the job kept changing so much based on how we were evolving the company. And, that's what I was attracted to with Frontdoor as well. The company has a rich history, growing company, profitable company on its own. And we are looking to transform it to meet our customers' needs, not only now, but in the future. And that's tremendously exciting.
And I think, for listeners and those who are watching the video, when you talk about being the chief people officer and managing people, through mergers and acquisitions, that sort of growth, and the culture, creating the culture between, different organizations and bringing them on so that you drive that culture, that's a whole nother piece. And then the organic growth, and then other countries, like there's so many nuances to your world. Like you said, it's not just one role. It's like 5 to 10 to probably like 10,000 roles. All these different moving pieces that you have to manage. So describe Frontdoor. To me, a big part of it is around for homeowners, especially making it easy and convenient and leveraging technology. And so whether it's repairs, innovation, it's all of the above. But how do you describe Frontdoor?
Sure. Our mission is to take the hassle out of home ownership, and that can be done in a variety of different ways. The biggest part of our business right now is the home service plan business, and that's where our members can subscribe. And for that subscription, they're able to get contractors out to their home when they have their dishwasher break or their air conditioning go out. And so and I had been a customer actually for years before becoming an employee. And we are also trying to evolve that customer experience. So how does somebody go through the process steps when they are either at any stage that they're doing business with us? And we're also looking at how we expand the types of problems we can solve in somebody's home. So for example, we acquired a company called Stream at the end of 2019, and they are creating an AI experience where that can help our existing customers do business with us in a different way. So as our customers' needs are changing, we can evolve with them. And Stream is also selling that same type of software to other companies. And so Lowe's is a big partner for us in that regard, as an example. So it's really exciting to both serve our existing customers better, as well as broaden what we're trying to accomplish in our industry.
How many employees, and you don't have to give an exact number, but what's the range of employees right now, and how far geographically does it spread?
So we have opened offices just in the last 2.5 years. We have our headquarters office that is a core part of our company in Memphis. We opened an office in Denver. We opened an office in Pune, India. And through acquisitions, we also acquired a team in Portland and in Los Angeles. And one of the things that has been really interesting over the last year is, we had become a distributed workforce. We were becoming a distributed workforce anyway. And the pandemic experience kind of put that on overdrive. And so what we were trying to prove out, hey, can we really do this? How do we do this well? How do we collaborate across all of those locations in a really productive way? Then all of a sudden we had to, which I think accelerated our growth as a company in being able to do that.
So let's start there, because there's a lot of threads that I kind of want to take with you just in terms of all these different topics. But let's start with the pandemic. What was that like in your role trying to manage through when you look at March of 2020 and all of a sudden, okay, work remote, how do we make sure that everyone has what they need to succeed? How do we manage culture, accountability, vacations, like all of these things? Walk us through kind of where you started, and then as you started to unpack some of the thought processes and the challenges and opportunities you were dealing with. So unpack the pandemic a little bit.
Sure. There was the immediate, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? The safety of our employees and the health of our employees was number one priority. And so in those first days and weeks, it was about, okay, how do we make it possible for everybody to work from home productively? And we had just switched over to Amazon Connect for how we handle our customer calls. And so that was that was a blessing that timing worked out. But we were able to get everybody to work virtually in 8 days, which was a tremendous accomplishment. I think gave peace of mind to our associates that we cared for them and were putting their health before anything else. Then it switched to, okay, how do we do this on an ongoing basis? And things like how do we create connections, and how do we avoid Zoom fatigue when we are all now on Zoom calls back to back, to then the long-term implications that we're thinking through right now of how does this shape our work in the future? When we go back, what do we want to go back to? And we're confident that we're not going to go back to exactly what we left in February of 2020. We're trying to think of how do we take the best of what we've learned over the last 12 to 15 months and incorporate that into thinking of a workforce that can both be connected and achieve our company's objectives and broaden a talent pool that we might have never had access to in the past.
I think that is something that the talent pool, because now you don't have to be where your office is. Now you can tap into talent, literally, like you said, nationally, even globally, which it really offers a powerful opportunity to leverage talent in new ways. At the same time, it brings obviously different challenges too. So talk about the yin and the yang of seeing it from that vantage point of obviously the positives, but what are some of the other things that you have to think through in terms of managing a different workforce for the future?
Yeah. On the pro side, the diversity of talent pools will absolutely help us as a company. And that's diversity of thought, diversity in all aspects that you can think of it in, by having the ability to not have to be in a physical location 100% of the time. So I think that's a huge advantage. The second advantage was we had a lot of people flying all over the place, prior to this experience. And now we've proved, let's come together with purpose. And I think that speaks to creating something that is much more sustainable for our associates in the longer run, for those who had been traveling a lot. On the con side, or not even the cons, but the things that we're thinking about and trying to work through is how do we maintain connection to each other and to the company when we are not physically in the same spaces as much. And so we are taking our leadership development curriculum and figuring out how to virtualize that, just as an example. We are figuring out what are connection points that used to happen really organically because people would run into each other in a physical office space. And how do we be more deliberate about creating those connections when we're more distributed? And so I think that will have a positive impact in the long run. It's messy, and because we didn't plan to be in this stage, there's a lot of things we're figuring out on the fly. Our employees are tremendously resilient and have so much positive energy around what we're trying to do. That's exciting, but I wouldn't call it easy.
What's something else that you think is going to make you stronger? So coming out of the pandemic, what's something that you've learned during the last 12 to 15 months that you think is going to make Frontdoor stronger?
It's interesting. So the company became its own publicly traded company in October of 2018. And I'd say for that first period, that first phase, we were in a honeymoon time of this is so exciting, and we all see the vision of what we can do and how we can transform the industry in our company, and that's tremendously energizing. And now we're working through what that means in every single part of our business, and that takes a little different focus, and it is hard. It's not linear. It is messy at times. And so working through that is something that we've learned and are continuing to learn over the last 12 months. Enabling our leaders to do that and to do it in a way that we're not trying to do things in a cookie cutter way. That's a huge takeaway from this past experience. And so that I would say is another thing that we've learned that will help us on this journey.
Speaking of the mergers and acquisition side, because there is a lot of that going on in general, what's a tip or just a couple of best practices when it comes to bringing a new team into your team and galvanizing the culture and the processes and just trying to bring everybody on the same page? What's one or two best practices or tips that you would offer up for others who are going through something similar that want to do it in the most successful way possible?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is start early. So in the due diligence process, having a way that you're identifying both the way your existing company works and what the culture is and what the target company, how they work. Just understanding what the similarities and differences are make a big difference. And understanding if the gaps are closable, and if so, what are the risks and how do you mitigate them? Or is it a deal breaker? I think that's when I think about the different ways deals can come apart, cultural mismatch is a way that they typically come apart after a deal is done. But some of those things can be identified when you're in the due diligence process. And then just being straightforward and transparent in order to address those things. I think the biggest wins come when there's that transparency and give and take between all associates and particularly the leaders that are involved.
What would your recommendations be for managing? Obviously, we're all dealing with this now with the pandemic, but remote workers and especially working within other countries. So for companies that are growing rapidly and having to look at multiple offices in different places and even different places geographically around the world, what are a couple of tips based on your experience?
Oh gosh, when going into a new country, there are so many things to think about. And it's, I would say, having a cross-functional team that is working on solving that problem about how to go into a country is imperative because you can't just work on the people part of it. There's taxation and finance and legal and all sorts of other ramifications that are interconnected that are really important to all be looking at the same time. Having an idea culturally of what's going on in the country that you're thinking about going into is also important. Our employees in Pune, with the last few weeks of what they've been going through with the surge of COVID there, has been really humbling, and we are trying to think of different ways that we can support our associates, and that's something I would say to make sure to pay attention to if somebody's considering going into a new country is, okay, what's the current landscape, and how do you also, other than the transactional work, make sure that they are truly a part of your team, that it's not some offshore location. That's, I think, a secret to success.
Yeah, that's great advice. What are some other trends that have your attention? So within the realm of HR, business strategy, we've covered quite a few, but what are some other ones that have your attention?
I am really interested to see what the long-term migration trends look like. When at the start of the pandemic, people were moving out of city centers. What's that going to look like 12, 24, 36 months from now? I'm really interested in that. I'm also interested in what are the downstream effects of that on pay in particular, with people moving from maybe higher cost of living areas to more moderate or less expensive cost of living areas. What are the implications for pay over time? We participate in external salary surveys, and we haven't seen that materialize yet, but I know it's coming because those are rear view mirror type of surveys, and so that is also going to be interesting, and what I'm paying particular attention to.
Because obviously not to bring out the crystal ball, but I mean, on your end, that brings up some really interesting dynamics because as a national or a global company, all of a sudden, if you've got somebody who was living in San Francisco, but now lives in an area that's more moderately priced where their money's going to go further, how does that factor in, any sort of like cost of living adjustments one way or the other, like all of that kind of stuff? Because now, to your point, as people become more mobile, well, now is it standardized pricing across for salaries and, bonuses and things like that? Or do you have to individualize for markets? So I guess there's a lot more now of just stuff you have to think about as a part of that process.
Yes, the game has changed. So when, historically doing compensation work, you're thinking about the geographic differentials and things like that. And it might not be that way in the future, or maybe to a less extent. So I'm really interested to see what trends develop there.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting because, with so many things, you think about one or two, but to your point, there's like thousands of other variables that you have to think about as you're making these decisions. When you look at the future of Frontdoor, give me something that really excites you from the business side. What excites you looking forward?
We are actually making this transformation happen, and that makes me excited more than anything. It's really interesting, when I think about being recruited and hearing Rex and the other leaders talk about what we were trying to do as a company and the market opportunity available if we did that. That's exciting in itself. And to see pieces come together is super rewarding. And we are starting to see that. It is hard work. And so making sure that we're giving appropriate props and letting people know, hey, we know this isn't easy. We know that this is a heavy lift. That's also a part of what we're trying to create here, is creating that recognition and positive encouragement for folks as we do make progress.
Well, I mentioned peanut buttering in the intro, and it was tied to a TED Talk that you gave in Memphis. And the TED Talk was really focused a lot around, it was you sharing kind of your story, both as an athlete, but as a mother as well, and around participation trophies and how that really discouraged the drive for achievement and the lessons that you learn. So before we talk about peanut buttering, give us a little bit of the TED Talk. Give us the executive summary of the TED Talk, which was really good.
Sure. Thank you. So the TED Talk was about the dangers of participation trophies and what we can do to help avoid them. And the idea started when I was watching my son, who at the time was 5, play soccer, and everybody got a trophy at the end of the season. Even some of the kids who weren't there for many of the games got a trophy. And it was maddening. I didn't understand it and thought, yeah, okay, they're 5, but this really bothers me. And then I started to see it show up in other aspects of life and in education and in sports as my son got older. And then, then you start to look for it because, you have that on your mind. And so I started to see things at work too. And so the focus of how can we make sure we're telling ourselves the truth and not only telling ourselves the sunny side of things in order to really reflect and improve. And that's the whole point of why I think we're here. It's not just to continue to do the status quo, it's to improve on what we've done before as humans. And that, is very much tied to innovation and creation, right? Some of the biggest innovations in our country have come at times of desperation when people didn't see other alternatives. And so I could talk on this for for quite some time, but that's how it initially started.
Well, and I like in there, you pointed out with the school specifically, that for so long they were awarding based on perfect attendance, good citizenship, good grades. So they had selected things that were motivators. So even if you weren't necessarily a straight A student, you had other things like perfect attendance that were great things to achieve for, that inspired the students. And then all of a sudden you get an email that's like, no, everybody's going to get a certificate and we're proud of them. And how that not only demotivated the parents, but the children themselves.
Yes.
Because it took away the motivation. And so I think that right there, it showed a couple of things. One is just what the students themselves feel by taking it away, but also two, the fact that those are things that they really want to strive for, to put themselves out there. And I think when you talk about then peanut buttering, which is where it shifts over, is Well, actually, describe peanut buttering because I don't want to steal the thunder. So describe peanut butter, and then I'll ask the question.
Well, one more point in the direction we were going. So the kids really do recognize it. My son was confused when they made that change and went from doing awards based on citizenship and attendance and grades to, hey, everybody's going to get a certificate as you walk across the stage and say something that you're proud of. It was demotivating. And him and several of his classmates were like, what the heck? And what does this even mean? And then I was talking about it with one of my colleagues in India, our engineering leader who leads our site there. And he was saying he was observing the same thing in his kids' school. So this is not just a phenomenon that is in one part of the country or even our country. It's I think it's a phenomenon everywhere to be aware of. And I think the implication is, well, then when you're in the middle of a performance review, when you're 35 years old, hearing hard feedback is even harder. And so how do we make it a habit to talk about what we're doing well and what we need to improve from a very young age, where that just feels natural? It's not threatening. No one's trying to come get you. It's a very natural part of how we improve as individuals and as a society, as opposed to something that is seen as negative. And the concept of peanut buttering is very much related to that. So I use it as a term when we're talking about salary increases and pay, because as many organizations do, we focus on paying for performance, and that means that if you're performing well or better, then your pay is reflective of that, and vice versa. If you're not performing or if you're struggling, then your pay is going to be less. And the concept of peanut buttering is, well, everybody's just going to get the same thing, whether that's a salary increase or a bonus amount, and that is orthogonal to this continuously thinking and reflecting and improving. I don't see them operating in tandem. And so it's really challenging ourselves when we see that to say, resist that urge. It's easy. It is easy, and it avoids some hard conversations, but in the long run, I think is more detrimental because we're not teaching ourselves the habit of how to accept and incorporate feedback.
Well, and you bring up the point that at an early age, learning how to win gracefully but lose gracefully. And so that way they can accept that feedback, whether it's positive or negative, and realize it's a growing opportunity. And then to your point on the compensation side, instead of just saying, okay, 3% across the board, no, really looking at it as, okay, let's go in individually and look at performance so that those who are achieving at a high level become even more motivated, and those who aren't can be helped strategically to then raise their performance to get where they want to go. And so taking a customized approach versus the peanut butter approach and just glossing over it. But that way it's more work, yes. But in the end, it's also a lot more motivation that leads to increased productivity, happiness, everything across the board.
Absolutely. And innovation. Absolutely. Because people are challenging themselves to do something better, different, more, even if they are performing well. That doesn't mean, rest on your laurels and just let life happen. And so I think that's so important. And it is a learned skill. It is a muscle to be built. And practice is, there's no like silver bullet. Practice is how you get there.
What do you tell employees who say, I really want to increase my performance? Like I want to, get that bigger percentage increase. I want to make that bonus. How do they track their performance? How do they tell that story so that they can put themselves in the best positioning to get where they want to go? So what advice do you have for employees who want to shine bright, but who don't necessarily know how to do that?
I'm a big supporter of OKRs, objectives and key results, because it takes something, even if it's not a financial goal, it takes something that is an objective and really has the support behind it of how you get there. And that, I think that clarity and that transparency of what good looks like and what excellent looks like is supported through, and we're big fans of the OKR process and using that as we create our business goals. That is a great way to talk with people about their individual growth as well. And what is the standard and what is a stretch. Those are things that you can talk about and take a concept that may not be as concrete. For example, some of the work that I do is very concrete and has financial goals associated with it. And some is, the sense of belonging at our company. That's harder to pin down, but it is possible through an OKR process to pin that down. And so that's what I would encourage both for teams and for individuals as they're trying to improve their own performance.
What advice would you give for entrepreneurs who are looking at ways to obviously build out their team and do it successfully, but to create a strong culture, who want to make sure that everyone feels like they're part of the family, but obviously, has a mission to accomplish? What are just one or two general tips you would give for entrepreneurs?
Oh, I love that question. The biggest one is know what you personally are good at as an entrepreneur and what you're not. And don't try to make your weakness a strength. Find people who complement you and don't be afraid of that. The businesses that I've seen, whether it was, during the time in my career when I was doing a ton of M&A work or just in the businesses I've been a part of that have been growing over time organically, that acknowledgement and that humility makes a huge difference between somebody who can be successful in that journey and a business that will struggle in that journey.
Give me one more, since you were on a roll with that. What's one other just random tip based on your experience?
Oh gosh. Recognize the stage of life that you're in as a company and just love the stage of life that you're in. And don't try to wish to be somewhere else, because one day you'll wish to be, one day you'll be in that other place and you'll go, oh gosh, I wish I was back in there. So, if you think about parallels of life and human development with company life and development, you have the startup, which is, infancy, and then you follow that through childhood and adolescence and adulthood. Just don't wish it away.
Yeah. Hey, that's, enjoy the present.
That's right.
I'm curious for you as a working mom, what is this world like now in terms of the virtual and the pandemic and just, being the chief people officer, being in charge of, the organization's culture and people, but yet also too being a mom and a spouse? Like what is that like in terms of balance and harmony and managing everything?
It's a good question. It's stressful. It's really stressful, and it's stressful in a different way than I've experienced stress at work in the recent past, even as an executive. But my son, for example, is home for 2 weeks because the pod that he's in at school, somebody tested positive for COVID, so the whole pod is home, and it is very different to be responsible for your work at work and be responsible for this human. And he's a fairly self-sufficient 7th grader. And so I really feel for the moms and the parents out there who have younger children, especially. Grace was the word of 2020, and I'll continue that into 2021. Give yourself some grace. Just as a parent and a mom, you're not going to get it 100% right. I was trying to juggle things last week, and I said to Rex at one point, okay, juggle, miss. Like, I missed this one thing. It's going to happen, and the ways that we can learn from that are important. And also, seeking support. I'm very thankful that I have a very wonderful support network with my parents who do a ton, and my husband. And so find your peeps that will help support you through it too.
Yeah, I definitely feel like grace, I agree. That's like the word of the year, the next 2 years, probably beyond too. But even like empathy and better understanding each other and realizing that what you see on social media versus the reality, like people are just trying to keep it all, together. And then like you said, for your children and our children to see that, as parents, we make mistakes, balls fall through the cracks. At the same time, we learn from them, and we accept that, and we apologize, and we grow from it. And so for the children to see that, hey, failure is going to happen, kind of back to the other point, failure is going to happen, but it's how do we learn and improve from that? And that becomes a big part of hopefully how they grow up, is seeing that and owning that on their own end so that they can mature as well.
Yeah. What I've loved seeing people's kids getting a sliver of what their life is beyond work has been really awesome. Seeing their pets and knowing what's important to them on a maybe a different level. That's been a silver lining. And it's something that, I hope that we carry forward we all come to work every day and that's where we spend the majority of our time. But how do we let a little bit of our personality shine too?
Absolutely. Humanize it. Come together. So let's switch over. This is a lightning round, which basically is just short questions, short answers is a fun way to wrap up. But what's a recent book you've read?
Ooh, you're gonna laugh. I've been into historical nonfiction. So I read a book on John Rockefeller. That was my last read.
That's cool. What do you like to do to relax?
Walk.
Any certain like a special path that you go on? Is it the same every time? Do you try to be different every time?
I try to switch it up a little bit, go different paths in our neighborhood, take one of the dogs. They love it.
So what sort of movies or TV shows do you like to watch?
Over this past year, we've tried to watch disaster movies. So Sharknado is, on the list. Something that is just totally outrageous. So we've been making our way through disaster movies that I didn't even know existed.
Are you someone who likes to stay up late or wake up early or both?
Wake up early.
Nice. What about a favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, St. Lucia.
Oh, that's a good one. Nice.
Yes. Any Caribbean island, but St. Lucia in particular.
Yeah, that's where my wife and I did our honeymoon. That's a good
Oh,
spot.
very nice.
So what sort of restaurants do you like to go to?
Oh, gosh. Oh, I love all kinds of food. Usually places where I can't make it myself or would not even try. So sushi is a big favorite. Any sort of fusion foods where people are just super creative and putting flavors together, that type of thing.
What sort of, you kind of said the family tradition around the food, but what's a fun memory for you and your family growing up?
Making gingerbread cookies was another one. So my mom has a fabulous gingerbread recipe, and every year, even now, we find a weekend a year to make them, and we rope other people in. So now my son and husband are well versed as well.
Do you show off on the diving board?
Not any time in the recent past.
I was about to say, you can be like the cool mom that's like doing all the tricks on the diving board and stuff.
Muscle memory is a fantastic thing, but I am not in the shape that I was in at that time.
What's well, you don't have to get it right in terms of verbatim, but like what's a favorite quote or something that inspires you, a saying?
Don't have the experience and miss the meaning. That is one of my things to live by.
What's something on your bucket list that you want to knock off sometime soon?
I would like to go to every continent. So I have one left, Antarctica. I've never been to Antarctica. So
all right. Yeah.
I don't know about how soon I'll be doing that, but
hey, yeah, well, I mean, that's cool. I like that. Okay. Last one. You're still creating your legacy every single day, but many years from now, what do you hope that people say about you and the difference you were able to make?
I hope that people say that I was a problem solver who had a competitive spirit and a touch of courage and really helped both organizations and people make meaningful change.
So where do we go to learn more about Frontdoor? So website, social media, where do we go there? And then where can we just follow your efforts personally?
Okay, so frontdoorhome.com is our website. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well. And that is the best place. LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Well, Jen, you are a change maker indeed. Thank you for all you do. And thank you for being a part of the podcast. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Changemakers podcast, produced by City Current and brought to you by Lipscomb and Pitts Insurance. To learn more about our guests and share your stories of others leading by example, visit us online at citycurrent.com or follow us on social media using @CityCurrent. Please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever you listen. Now, think big, start small, and act now. Be a change maker.